I pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Riverside Luxury Apartments construction site, my heart racing with anticipation. As a state building inspector, I had received an anonymous tip about serious safety violations at this $20 million project. I deliberately wore faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt, wanting to blend in with the workers before revealing my identity. The moment I stepped out of my Honda Civic and grabbed a basic yellow hard hat from my trunk site manager, Derek Hamilton, spotted me from across the dusty worksite and began marching in my direction with fury blazing in his eyes. My name is Lydia, and at 32 years old, I had spent the last 8 years as a state building inspector after earning my civil engineering degree from Georgia Tech. The career choice stemmed from witnessing a horrific apartment building collapse in Atlanta that killed 3 innocent families, including 2 children under the age of 10. That tragedy burned itself into my memory and drove me to ensure no other families would suffer due to construction negligence. Derek Hamilton stood 6 feet 4 inches tall with a beer belly hanging over his leather tool belt, his face red from both sun exposure and apparent anger management issues. The moment he reached me, spittle flew from his mouth as he unleashed a verbal assault that made nearby construction workers pause their concrete mixing and steel beam positioning to watch the spectacle unfold. "What the hell do you think you're doing here, lady?" Derek bellowed, his voice carrying across the entire construction zone. "This is a professional worksite, not some playground for wandering idiots who don't know a hammer from a screwdriver." I maintained my composure despite feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment. Several workers had stopped their tasks completely, some pulling out cell phones to record what they clearly expected to become an entertaining confrontation. The morning sun beat down on the exposed foundation, and I could already see obvious problems with the concrete work that made my engineering training scream warnings. "Sir, I'm here to conduct an inspection of this facility." I began calmly reaching into my back pocket for my state credentials. "There have been concerns raised about potential safety violations, and I need to examine the structural elements before construction proceeds further." Derek's laughter boomed across the site with genuine mockery. "Inspection? You look like you just rolled out of bed after spending the night under a bridge. Real inspectors wear suits and drive government vehicles, sweetheart. They don't show up looking like they're about to ask for spare change at a gas station." The humiliation stung deeply, but what happened next cut even deeper. Jake Morrison, the site foreman, emerged from a white trailer marked with Sterling Construction Group logos. My stomach dropped as I recognized the face of my college boyfriend, someone I had loved deeply and trusted completely until he abandoned our relationship during senior year. Jake wore expensive work boots, crisp khaki pants, and a polo shirt with the company emblem embroidered on the chest. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his confident stride suggested he had found considerable success in the construction industry. When his eyes met mine, recognition flickered across his features, but instead of the warmth I remembered from our college days, his expression shifted to something between surprise and disdain. "Well, well, well," Jake announced loudly enough for everyone within 50 feet to hear clearly. "If it isn't Lydia Chen, the girl who always thought she was smarter than everyone else in our engineering classes." The use of my full name in front of the hostile crowd felt like a deliberate attempt to establish dominance and control over the situation. Derek's eyes lit up with malicious glee as he realized Jake and I shared some kind of history that he could exploit for maximum embarrassment. "You two know each other?" Derek asked with obvious delight. "This keeps getting better by the minute." Jake crossed his arms over his chest and smirked in a way that transported me back to our worst arguments during college. "Lydia here used to lecture our entire study group about proper engineering ethics and safety protocols. She was always the one raising her hand in class to point out theoretical problems that would never happen in real-world construction." My hands trembled slightly as old emotions mixed with professional fury. "Those theoretical problems kill people, Jake. Remember the Riverside Tower collapse we studied in our structural engineering course? That happened because someone ignored the same types of violations I'm seeing right here on this foundation." Oh, spare us the righteous speech, Jake replied dismissively. You ended up as a government inspector because you couldn't hack it in actual construction work. Meanwhile, some of us built real careers with real companies that create real value for communities. Derek clapped Jake on the shoulder like they were old drinking buddies. So this little lady thinks she can shut down a $20 million project because she read some textbooks in college. Actually, Jake continued, his voice taking on a deliberately cruel edge. Lydia always preferred books to people. That's probably why she's still single and working for the government instead of building something meaningful with her life. The personal attack hit harder than any professional insult could have. Jake knew about my struggle with relationships, my dedication to work that often left little time for personal connections, and my deep insecurity about whether I had made the right career choices. Using that intimate knowledge as a weapon in front of hostile strangers felt like the ultimate betrayal. For your information, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, I'm engaged to Amanda Sterling, daughter of the owner of Sterling Construction Group. We're planning a wedding at the Ritz-Carlton next spring, and I'm being promoted to regional operations manager next month. The name Sterling hit me like a physical blow. Sterling Construction Group had a reputation throughout the state for aggressive expansion and political connections that helped them win major contracts. If Jake was marrying into that family, it explained his confident attitude and expensive appearance. Derek's phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen before grinning wickedly. Speaking of important people, that was my buddy at the county building department. Seems like there's no record of any scheduled inspection for this site today, which means you're trespassing on private property, sweetheart. My heart raced as I realized my surprise inspection strategy had backfired completely. I had deliberately avoided scheduling the visit through official channels to prevent any advance warning that might allow violations to be hidden or corrected temporarily. Now that element of surprise was being used against me. I have full authority to conduct unscheduled inspections at any construction site in the county, I stated firmly, pulling out my official identification badge. This is my legal right and responsibility as a state inspector. Jake stepped closer, his expression shifting from mockery to something approaching genuine hostility. You know what I think, Derek? I think our old classmate here is jealous that some of us moved on to bigger and better things while she stayed stuck in the same small-minded world of government bureaucracy. Several workers had gathered in a loose circle around us, some openly filming with their smartphones while others whispered among themselves about the drama unfolding. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky and sweat began beading on my forehead from both heat and stress. I forced myself to focus on the structural problems visible even from where we stood. The concrete foundation showed irregular coloring that suggested improper mixing ratios. Steel reinforcement bars appeared to be spaced too far apart according to standard building codes. Most concerning hairline cracks had already appeared in sections of concrete that should have been solid for decades. Look, I said, pointing toward the foundation irregularities. Whatever history we have doesn't change the fact that this building has serious structural problems that could endanger future residents. People's lives are more important than personal grudges or construction schedules. Derek stepped between me and the foundation, blocking my view and establishing himself as a physical barrier to my inspection efforts. The only problem I see here is some wannabe inspector who thinks she can waltz onto my site and play pretend with the grown-ups. The confrontation had reached a point where my professional authority was being completely undermined by personal attacks and deliberate obstruction. I needed to either assert my legal position forcefully or retreat and return with backup, but either choice would represent a significant defeat in front of an audience that seemed eager to see me fail. Jake pulled out his own phone and began typing rapidly. I'm texting Amanda about this interesting encounter. Her father will find it amusing that someone from our college engineering program ended up as a low-level government employee trying to interfere with Sterling construction projects. The threat was clear. My actions here would be reported to the highest levels of the construction company, potentially creating political pressure that could affect my career and future inspection activities. The power dynamics were shifting decisively against me, and I could feel the situation spiraling beyond my control. I retreated toward my car, ostensibly accepting defeat, while actually planning my next move. The verbal humiliation burned, but my engineering training demanded that I document the structural violations regardless of personal embarrassment. As I reached my Honda Civic, I heard Derek's voice carrying across the construction site as he called out additional insults about government workers who couldn't understand real construction. My hand shook as I fumbled with my car keys, but instead of starting the engine and driving away, I rolled down the windows and pretended to make phone calls while actually listening to conversations happening near the construction trailers. The acoustics of the open site carried voices much farther than Derek and Jake realized. Thank God we got rid of her before she could see the real problems. Derek's voice drifted clearly through my open window. He had moved to stand beside Jake near a cluster of concrete mixing equipment about 30 feet from my parking spot. What do you mean, real problems? Jake asked, his voice lower, but still audible, due to the lack of background noise from construction equipment. The foundation work we finished last week, Derek replied, glancing around to ensure no workers were within earshot. We used the cheap concrete mix that Patricia Whitman approved through her husband's supply company, saved us $40,000 on materials alone. My heart stopped. Patricia Whitman was a county council member with significant influence over building permits and inspection schedules. If she was involved in approving substandard materials, this corruption went far beyond simple construction shortcuts. Jake's voice took on a worried tone. You mean the concrete doesn't meet specifications? What happens if someone actually tests it? Nobody's going to test it, Derek said confidently. Patricia makes sure all the official inspections happen when we're using the good materials for the visible sections. By the time this building is occupied, the foundation problems will be the next owner's headache, not ours. I fumbled for my phone hands, trembling as I activated the voice recording app. This conversation represented criminal conspiracy involving public corruption, fraudulent materials, and deliberate endangerment of future residents. How many other projects are we running the same scam on? Jake asked, his voice barely audible, but carrying clearly in the still morning air. 3 more apartment complexes across the county, Derek replied with obvious pride. Patricia's husband supplies concrete to all of them through different subsidiary companies, so nobody connects the dots. We've saved Sterling Construction over $200,000 this year alone. What about inspectors like Lydia? Jake pressed. What happens if someone actually knows what to look for? Derek's laugh was cold and calculating. That's where Patricia earns her monthly payments. She gets advance notice of all scheduled inspections and makes sure our sites are clean when officials show up. Unscheduled visits like today are handled through intimidation and political pressure. Political pressure. Patricia has dirt on half the county government, Derek explained. Building department supervisors, zoning committee members, even some state-level officials who owe their jobs to her political machine. One phone call from her office can end an inspector's career or transfer them to some rural district where they'll never see another major project. My blood ran cold as I realized the scope of this conspiracy. Patricia Whitman wasn't just taking bribes, she was running a comprehensive corruption network that controlled multiple layers of government oversight. What kind of dirt? Jake asked, his voice reflecting growing unease about the criminal activities he was apparently becoming involved with. Financial irregularities, extramarital affairs, family members getting jobs they weren't qualified for, Derek listed casually. Patricia's been collecting compromising information on local officials for over a decade. She knows which building department employees are related to construction company owners, which inspectors have gambling debts, and which county commissioners have been taking money from development groups. Jesus, Jake muttered. This is way bigger than I realized. Welcome to Real Construction College, boy, Derek said mockingly. Your fancy engineering degree doesn't mean anything if you can't navigate the political realities of getting projects approved and built on schedule. A security guard emerged from one of the trailers and began walking toward my car, forcing me to stop recording and act natural. I quickly started my engine and backed out of the parking space, but not before hearing Derek's final comment to Jake. "Don't worry about your college girlfriend," Derek called out loudly enough for me to hear. "Patricia will make sure she never bothers us again, one way or another." The threat was unmistakable, and as I drove away from the construction site, my mind raced with implications of what I had discovered. This wasn't just about one corrupt building project. It was about a systematic network of fraud that was putting countless residents at risk while enriching a small group of connected individuals. I needed to contact my supervisor immediately, but Derek's comments about political pressure made me hesitant to trust normal reporting channels. If Patricia Whitman really did have influence over state-level officials, going through standard procedures might result in my evidence disappearing and my career being destroyed. The recording on my phone represented potential criminal evidence, but it also made me a target for people who had already demonstrated they were willing to use intimidation and political manipulation to protect their schemes. I had stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous than simple construction violations. My college training in structural engineering had taught me to identify foundation problems that could lead to building failures. Now I was discovering that the real foundations at risk were the systems of government oversight that were supposed to protect public safety. The question was whether I had the courage and resources to challenge such a well-established network of corruption. As I drove through the suburban streets surrounding the construction site, I noticed several other Sterling construction projects in various stages of development. Signs advertised luxury apartments, townhome communities, and mixed-use developments, all promising high-quality construction and modern amenities. How many of these projects were using the same fraudulent materials and corrupt approval processes? The weight of responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. If I walked away from this situation, future residents would move into buildings with compromised structural integrity, never knowing that their homes were potential death traps. But if I pursued the investigation, I was challenging people with the power to destroy careers and possibly worse. My phone rang, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. The caller ID showed Jake's number, which I hadn't deleted despite our breakup years earlier. Against my better judgment, I answered the call. "Lydia, we need to talk." Jake's voice was tense and urgent. "Meet me at the coffee shop on Maple Street in 20 minutes. Come alone and don't tell anyone about this conversation." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me with a choice that would determine whether I continued pursuing this investigation or abandoned it for my own safety. Everything my engineering training had taught me about structural integrity was about to be tested in ways I had never imagined. I drove straight home instead of meeting Jake, my hands still trembling from adrenaline and the implications of what I had recorded. My apartment complex, Riverside Gardens, was a mid-rise development that had always seemed like a safe and affordable place to live. As I pulled into my assigned parking space, I noticed details I had never paid attention to before: the building's exterior walls, the balcony railings, and the foundation landscaping that might be hiding structural problems. Walking up the exterior staircase to my third-floor unit, I felt a chill as I spotted a small metal placard near the main entrance that I had passed hundreds of times without reading. Riverside Gardens Apartments, constructed by Sterling Construction Group. Completed May 2019. My stomach dropped. I had been living in a Sterling construction building for over 3 years, never realizing the connection until this moment. If Derek's claims about fraudulent materials and corrupt inspections were true, my own home might be structurally compromised. I unlocked my apartment door with shaking hands and immediately went to my laptop to research Sterling Construction Group's recent projects. The company website showcased dozens of residential developments across 4 counties, with glossy photos of satisfied families moving into their new homes. The marketing emphasized quality construction, attention to detail, and commitment to safety standards. Local news archives told a different story. Over the past 2 years, I found multiple reports of problems at Sterling construction properties. Balcony collapses foundation. settling that cracked interior walls, plumbing failures that flooded units, and electrical problems that had caused small fires. Each incident was reported as an isolated issue, but seeing them together revealed a pattern of systemic construction defects. My heart nearly stopped when I found an obituary from 3 weeks ago. Eleanor Garrett, age 78, died Tuesday evening when the balcony of her apartment collapsed during a family barbecue. Mrs. Garrett is survived by her daughter Linda and granddaughter Sarah. Mrs. Garrett had lived in Unit 3B directly across the hall from my apartment. I remembered hearing sirens that evening and seeing paramedics in the hallway, but I had been told she suffered a heart attack. The news report about the balcony collapse had somehow escaped my attention, probably because I was traveling for work that week. I walked onto my own balcony with new awareness of every creak and sway. The railing felt solid enough, but I noticed hairline cracks in the concrete where the balcony attached to the main building structure. Had those cracks been there before, or was I just noticing them now because of my heightened awareness? My laptop research revealed that Mrs. Garrett's balcony collapse was attributed to maintenance issues related to the building's age. But Riverside Gardens was only 6 years old. Proper construction should have resulted in decades of safe use before any structural problems developed. I found the original building permits for Riverside Gardens in the county database. Every inspection had been signed off by officials whose names appeared on Patricia Whitman's campaign finance reports as contributors. The concrete inspection was approved by an engineer whose company had received a county contract for road construction projects that Patricia had championed. The scope of corruption was staggering. It wasn't just about one construction site or even one company. Patricia Whitman had apparently created a network of compromised officials who approved substandard work in exchange for political support, financial contributions, and future business opportunities. My phone rang, startling me out of my research. The caller ID showed Sarah Garrett's number. I had exchanged contact information with her after Mrs. Garrett's funeral, offering condolences and help with any administrative issues related to the apartment lease. "Hi, Lydia." Sarah's voice was tired and strained. "I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to ask you about something. You're an engineer, right? You mentioned that at the funeral." "Yes, I'm a civil engineer and building inspector," I replied, already dreading where this conversation might lead. "The apartment management company is claiming that my grandmother's balcony collapsed because she was overweight and had too many people on it during the barbecue," Sarah continued. "But Grandma Eleanor only weighed 120 pounds and she was alone when it happened. The paramedics said she was trying to water her plants when the railing gave way." My heart ached for Sarah and for the cover-up that was clearly happening. "Have you considered having an independent engineer examine the balcony structure?" "We can't afford it," Sarah admitted. "The insurance company is refusing to pay anything because they claim it was a maintenance issue, not a construction defect. The apartment complex is threatening to sue us for damages to the building if we pursue legal action." "Sarah," I said carefully, "what if I told you that your grandmother's death might not have been an isolated accident? What if there were systematic problems with the construction of this entire building?" There was a long pause before Sarah responded. "What do you mean, systematic problems?" I explained my discoveries about Sterling Construction Group and the pattern of structural failures across their properties, careful not to reveal the criminal conspiracy I had uncovered earlier that day. Sarah listened in stunned silence as I described the corruption network that might have contributed to her grandmother's death. "You're saying someone took bribes to approve bad construction, and that's why Grandma Eleanor died?" Sarah's voice was filled with growing anger. "I'm saying it's possible, and if that's true, then your grandmother's death was preventable and the people responsible should be held accountable." Sarah was quiet for several long moments. "What can we do? We don't have money for lawyers or expert witnesses." "Let me work on this," I promised. "I might be able to help you get the evidence you need to prove that the balcony collapse was caused by construction defects, not maintenance issues or user error." After ending the call, I sat in my apartment trying to process the personal dimension of what I had discovered. This wasn't just about abstract building codes and professional regulations anymore. An elderly woman had died because corrupt officials had allowed a construction company to use substandard materials and methods. Her family was being blamed and threatened for seeking answers about her death. I walked back onto my balcony and examined the attachment points more carefully. The concrete anchors showed signs of premature deterioration, and the metal railings had rust spots that suggested poor quality materials or improper installation. If Mrs. Garrett's balcony had failed due to similar problems, how long before other balconies in the building became dangerous? My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. Lydia, I know you're angry, but you need to understand how dangerous this situation is becoming. Derek is talking about making sure you don't cause any more problems. Meet me tomorrow morning at the diner on 5th Street. Your life might depend on it. The implied threat was unmistakable. By recording Derek's conversation about the corruption network, I had made myself a target for people who had already demonstrated they were willing to use intimidation and possibly violence to protect their criminal enterprise. I looked around my apartment with new eyes, realizing that I wasn't safe here. If the building had structural problems, staying here was physically dangerous. If Derek and Patricia Whitman decided to escalate their intimidation tactics, staying here made me an easy target for harassment or worse. The weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. I had stumbled into evidence of a corruption network that was endangering thousands of residents across multiple housing developments. Mrs. Garrett's death was probably just the beginning of what would happen if this criminal enterprise continued operating unchecked. But challenging such well-connected and ruthless people would require resources and courage that I wasn't sure I possessed. They had already demonstrated their ability to destroy careers and cover up construction defects that killed innocent people. What would they do to someone who threatened to expose their entire operation? Despite Jake's ominous warning, I decided to continue gathering evidence before meeting with him. If this was going to become a dangerous situation, I needed concrete proof of the corruption network to protect myself and ensure that Mrs. Garrett's death would not be in vain. I called my supervisor, Tom Bradley, early the next morning to report the violations I had discovered at the Sterling construction site. Tom had always seemed supportive of my thorough inspection methods, and I hoped he would provide the backup I needed to pursue this investigation officially. Tom, I need to discuss some serious violations I discovered yesterday at the Riverside Luxury Apartments construction site. I began trying to keep my voice professional despite my nervousness. There was an unusually long pause before Tom responded. Lydia, I hope you followed proper procedures for any inspection activities. You know how important it is to coordinate with local officials and construction companies before conducting site visits. His tone felt different from our usual conversations, more cautious and formal than I expected. The violations are extensive, Tom. Substandard concrete, improper reinforcement spacing, and evidence of a systematic pattern of fraud involving county officials. Fraud is a very serious accusation, Tom said carefully. You'll need to document everything through official channels and make sure your evidence would stand up to legal scrutiny. Are you certain about what you observed? I have recordings of construction officials admitting to using fraudulent materials and bribing county council members, I explained. This goes way beyond simple building code violations. Another long pause. Lydia, I think you should come into the office this afternoon so we can discuss this situation in person. Don't share this information with anyone else until we've had a chance to review your findings together. Something in Tom's voice triggered my suspicions. His reluctance to express outrage about corruption involving public safety seemed completely out of character for someone who had always emphasized the importance of our enforcement responsibilities. After ending the call, I decided to conduct my own investigation of additional Sterling construction sites before meeting with Tom. If there was a systematic pattern of fraud, I needed to document it thoroughly before anyone could interfere with my evidence gathering. I spent the entire morning visiting 3 other Sterling construction developments in various stages of completion. At each site, I found similar problems: substandard concrete work, improper reinforcement installation, and structural elements that clearly violated building codes. Most disturbing, I discovered falsified inspection reports at two of the sites with official signatures approving work that had obvious defects. By early afternoon, I had photographed dozens of violations and collected copies of fraudulent inspection documents. The pattern was unmistakable. Sterling Construction was systematically cutting corners on materials and methods, while corrupt officials provided fraudulent approvals to keep projects moving forward. As I finished my investigation at the third site, I noticed Derek's pickup truck parked near the construction trailer. I quickly moved my car to a position where I could observe the site without being seen, hoping to gather additional evidence about the corruption network. At 4:30 in the afternoon, a black sedan with county government license plates pulled into the construction site. Patricia Whitman stepped out of the passenger seat wearing a navy blue business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Even from a distance, I could see her scanning the area carefully before approaching Derek's trailer. I activated my phone's recording app and focused on capturing whatever I could hear of their conversation. The afternoon wind carried voices clearly across the open construction area as Patricia and Derek met beside the concrete mixing equipment. "The inspector's situation is becoming problematic." Patricia's voice was sharp and authoritative. "My contacts at the state level are asking questions about recent inspection activities in our county." "I thought you had that handled," Derek replied, his usual confident tone replaced by obvious nervousness. "I do, but this particular inspector has a reputation for being thorough and difficult to intimidate," Patricia explained. "Normal political pressure might not be sufficient to resolve the problem." "What are you suggesting?" Patricia opened her briefcase and removed an envelope, handing it to Derek. "I'm suggesting that you make sure she understands the personal risks of continuing this investigation. Construction sites can be dangerous places, especially for people who don't follow proper safety protocols." My blood ran cold as I realized Patricia was ordering Derek to threaten me with physical harm. This had escalated from professional intimidation to criminal conspiracy involving potential violence. "You want me to hurt her?" Derek asked, his voice uncertain. "I want you to make sure she stops interfering with our business operations," Patricia clarified. "How you accomplish that goal is your decision, but the problem needs to be resolved permanently." "What if she's already reported what she found to her supervisors?" Patricia's laugh was cold and confident. "Her supervisor is my brother Tom. He'll make sure any reports disappear, and her credibility is destroyed if she tries to pursue this further." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Tom Bradley, my supervisor, who I had trusted with sensitive information about the corruption network, was Patricia Whitman's brother and apparently a part of the criminal conspiracy. I had walked directly into a trap by reporting my findings to him earlier that day. "Tom's been covering for our operations for over 3 years," Patricia continued. "He makes sure problematic inspectors get transferred to rural districts where they can't interfere with major development projects. But this situation might require more direct intervention." Derek pocketed the envelope and nodded grimly. "I'll handle it. The inspector won't be a problem much longer." "Make sure you don't," Patricia warned. "This network generates over $1 million annually in savings for construction companies and fees for county officials. We can't allow one idealistic government employee to destroy years of careful planning." I had heard enough to understand that I was in immediate danger. Patricia and Derek were planning to use violence or threats of violence to silence me, and my own supervisor was part of their criminal network. Going through official channels would only alert them to my activities and give them opportunities to destroy evidence or escalate their intimidation tactics. As Patricia returned to her sedan and Derek walked back toward his trailer, I carefully started my car and drove away from the construction site. My hands shook as I realized the full scope of what I was facing: a well-funded criminal network with connections throughout county government and the state inspection system. I needed allies outside the normal reporting channels, but I wasn't sure who I could trust. Local news media might be interested in the story, but Patricia's political connections could include newspaper publishers and television station owners. Law enforcement officials might also be compromised by the same corruption network that had infiltrated the building inspection system. My phone rang as I drove through downtown traffic. The caller ID showed Jake's number again, but this time I was afraid to answer. Was he calling to warn me about Derek's plans? Or was he part of the intimidation campaign that Patricia had ordered? The recording device on my phone contained evidence of criminal conspiracy, bribery, and threats of violence, but it also made me a target for people who had already demonstrated they were willing to kill to protect their operation. Mrs. Garrett's death was starting to look less like an accident and more like the result of deliberate criminal negligence. I had to make a choice: abandon the investigation to protect my own safety or find a way to expose the corruption network before they could silence me permanently. Either choice carried enormous risks, but only one offered the possibility of justice for Mrs. Garrett and protection for future residents of Sterling construction buildings. The sun was setting as I drove toward an uncertain future, carrying evidence that could destroy careers and send multiple officials to prison, but only if I survived long enough to make it public. The next 24 hours would determine whether corruption or justice would prevail in my small corner of the world. I spent the night at my sister Rachel's house across town, afraid to return to my own apartment after overhearing Patricia's threats. Rachel worked as a nurse at the county hospital and had always been protective of me, but I couldn't explain the full danger of my situation without potentially putting her at risk as well. "You look terrible," Rachel observed as she made coffee the next morning. "What's going on with you lately? You've seemed stressed about work for weeks." "Just some complicated cases that are taking longer to resolve than expected." I deflected, not wanting to involve her in the criminal conspiracy I had discovered. My phone rang at 7:15, showing Jake's number again. This time I decided to answer, hoping to learn more about Derek's plans and whether Jake was genuinely trying to help or setting me up for further intimidation. "Lydia, thank God you answered." Jake's voice was tense and worried. "We need to meet right now. Derek is planning something bad and you're in real danger." "Why should I trust you?" I asked suspiciously. "Yesterday you were laughing at me with Derek and bragging about marrying into the Sterling family." "Because I'm scared," Jake admitted. "After you left, Derek told me about the money they've been making from this corruption scheme, and he asked if I wanted to be part of it. When I hesitated, he started talking about what happens to people who know too much about their operation." "What kind of things?" "He mentioned a building inspector from another county who was transferred to rural assignments after asking too many questions about Sterling construction projects. Then he talked about an architect who had an unfortunate car accident after refusing to approve structural modifications that violated safety codes." My heart raced as I realized Derek was threatening Jake as well. "Are you saying they've hurt people before?" "I'm saying Derek enjoys talking about how problems get resolved when people don't cooperate," Jake replied. "He's hired 2 guys from his old construction crew to convince you to stop your investigation. They're planning to visit you today." "Convince me how?" "However they need to," Jake said grimly. "Derek gave them your address and told them to make sure you understand the consequences of interfering with Sterling construction projects." I felt sick realizing that my home address was now in the hands of people who were being paid to intimidate or harm me. "Jake, why are you warning me? What do you get out of this?" There was a long pause before Jake answered. "Because I've been skimming money from the bribes Patricia pays to Derek. I've taken almost $15,000 over the past 6 months, thinking it was just harmless construction industry politics. If this investigation exposes the whole network, I'll go to prison for corruption and theft." The admission explained Jake's sudden concern for my safety. He wasn't trying to protect me out of old affection. He was trying to protect himself from criminal prosecution. "What are you proposing?" I asked carefully. "Meet me at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street in an hour," Jake said. "I'll give you information about all the Sterling construction projects using fraudulent materials, and you can use that evidence however you want. In exchange, you keep my name out of any official reports about the financial side of the corruption." The offer was tempting but dangerous. Jake might be genuinely trying to help, or this could be an elaborate setup to get me into a location where Derek's hired thugs could confront me without witnesses. How do I know this isn't a trap? I asked bluntly. Because I'm bringing copies of financial records showing exactly how much money Sterling Construction has saved through their fraud schemes, Jake replied. I've been keeping detailed records of every payment I received, thinking I might need evidence to protect myself someday. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Jake at the diner. If he really had financial evidence of the corruption network, it would corroborate my recordings and provide additional proof of criminal activity. But I also called the diner ahead of time to make sure it would be busy during our meeting. Reducing the risk of being confronted by Derek's associates in a private setting. Murphy's diner was crowded with the morning breakfast rush when I arrived exactly as I had hoped. Jake was already seated in a corner booth looking nervous and constantly checking his phone for messages. He had spread several manila folders on the table, suggesting he had brought the financial records he had promised. Thank you for coming, Jake said as I sat down across from him. I know you have every reason not to trust me after yesterday. Show me what you have, I said without pleasantries. Jake opened the first folder and revealed detailed spreadsheets tracking payments from Sterling Construction Group to various county officials over an 18-month period. Patricia Whitman had received monthly payments ranging from $5,000 to $12,000, depending on the number and size of projects requiring corrupt approvals. Derek pays me 8% of the money Sterling Construction saves on each project by using substandard materials, Jake explained. I thought I was just getting performance bonuses for efficient project management. I didn't realize the money came from criminal fraud until yesterday. The financial records were damning evidence of systematic corruption involving multiple construction projects across 4 counties. Sterling Construction Group had saved over $800,000 through fraudulent materials and corrupt approvals while paying roughly $200,000 in bribes to various officials. This shows Patricia Whitman received almost $90,000 in illegal payments. I observed studying the spreadsheets carefully. It gets worse, Jake said, opening the second folder. Sterling Construction has similar arrangements with officials in neighboring counties. They're running this scam across dozens of residential developments, potentially affecting thousands of families. The scope of the corruption network was staggering. This wasn't just about one apartment complex or even one county. It was a regional criminal enterprise that was systematically endangering residents across a wide geographic area. Jake, why did you keep such detailed records of illegal payments? I asked suspiciously. Because Derek is paranoid about people stealing from him, Jake admitted. He requires documentation of every transaction so he can verify that everyone is getting their correct percentage of the savings. I was afraid that if my records didn't match his, he'd accuse me of embezzling additional money. And you're willing to give me all this evidence. I'm hoping we can make a deal, Jake said carefully. I'll provide you with everything I have about the financial side of the corruption, including contact information for officials in other counties who are part of the network. In exchange, you keep my cooperation confidential and recommend immunity from prosecution in exchange for my testimony. The offer was appealing, but I wasn't in a position to negotiate immunity deals with prosecutors. I can't make any guarantees about legal immunity, but I can promise that your cooperation will be reported accurately to law enforcement officials. Jake nodded reluctantly and handed me copies of all the financial records. There's something else you need to know about Derek's plans. He's not just planning to intimidate you with threats. What do you mean? He's planning to frame you for safety violations at construction sites you've never visited, Jake explained. Patricia has access to inspection databases through her brother Tom. They're going to create false records showing that you approved substandard work at several Sterling construction projects, then use those records to destroy your credibility and potentially charge you with corruption. My stomach dropped as I realized the sophistication of their plan. They weren't just trying to silence me through intimidation. They were planning to destroy my professional reputation and potentially send me to prison on false charges. When is this supposed to happen? Derek said they need to move fast. Because you might have already shared your evidence with other people, Jake replied. The false records will be inserted into the inspection database sometime today, and Patricia plans to file official complaints against you with state authorities by the end of the week. I had walked into a situation that was far more dangerous and complex than I had initially realized. The corruption network had resources and connections that allowed them to manipulate official records and frame innocent people for crimes they hadn't committed. There's one more thing, Jake said quietly. Derek mentioned that if the frame-up doesn't work, they might need to consider more permanent solutions to the inspector problem. The implication was clear: if they couldn't destroy my credibility through false charges, they might resort to violence to silence me permanently. Mrs. Garrett's death was looking more and more like the result of deliberate criminal negligence, and I might be the next victim of their willingness to prioritize profits over human lives. I thanked Jake for the information and left the diner with copies of financial records that proved systematic corruption, but also made me an even bigger target for people who had already demonstrated their willingness to use any means necessary to protect their criminal enterprise. The morning sun felt different as I walked to my car, carrying evidence that could send multiple people to prison, but also knowing that those same people were actively planning to frame or harm me before I could expose their crimes. The next few hours would determine whether justice or corruption would prevail in this deadly game of cat and mouse. I drove straight to the state inspection office, hoping to find allies who weren't compromised by Patricia Whitman's corruption network. But as I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Tom Bradley's car in his reserved space and realized I would have to confront my supervisor, despite knowing he was Patricia's brother and part of the criminal conspiracy. Tom was waiting in his office when I arrived, sitting behind his desk with a folder that I suspected contained the false inspection records that Jake had warned me about. His usually friendly demeanor had been replaced by a cold professionalism that confirmed my worst fears about his loyalties. "Lydia, please have a seat," Tom said formally. "We need to discuss some serious concerns that have been raised about your recent inspection activities." "What kind of concerns?" I asked, even though I already knew what was coming. Tom opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. "These are inspection reports from Sterling construction projects over the past 6 months, all bearing your signature and inspector number. Unfortunately, subsequent engineering reviews have revealed that these inspections approved substandard work that violates multiple building codes." I leaned forward to examine the documents, immediately recognizing them as sophisticated forgeries. My signature had been reproduced perfectly, and the inspection numbers were consistent with my assigned range, but I had never visited any of the construction sites listed in the reports. "Tom, I've never been to any of these construction sites," I said firmly. "These inspection reports are completely fraudulent." "That's a very serious accusation," Tom replied with practiced concern. "Are you suggesting that someone forged your signature and inspection credentials to create false records?" "I'm suggesting that you and your sister Patricia have created these false records to frame me for corruption after I discovered your criminal conspiracy with Sterling Construction Group." Tom's expression didn't change, but I noticed his hands tighten slightly around the folder. "Lydia, I'm concerned that the stress of your job might be affecting your judgment. Accusing a county council member and your supervisor of criminal conspiracy is not the kind of behavior we expect from state employees. I have recordings of Derek Hamilton and Patricia Whitman discussing bribes, fraudulent materials, and plans to intimidate inspectors who discover their violations," I stated clearly. "I also have financial records showing systematic corruption across multiple counties." "Where are these alleged recordings and financial records?" Tom asked calmly. I realized he was trying to determine whether I had shared the evidence with other people, or if it could be contained by discrediting or eliminating me. "They're in a safe place where your corruption network can't access or destroy them." Tom leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Lydia, I'm going to recommend that you take immediate medical leave to address what appears to be a stress-related breakdown. Making paranoid accusations against respected public officials is a clear sign that you need professional help. And if I refuse..." Then I'll have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation of these inspection irregularities, Tom said, gesturing toward the forged documents. The state attorney general's office takes corruption very seriously, especially when it involves inspectors who approve dangerous construction work in exchange for payments. The trap was closing around me exactly as Jake had predicted. They were offering me a choice between accepting medical leave that would discredit my credibility or facing suspension and potential prosecution based on forged evidence. Tom, how long have you been part of Patricia's corruption network? I asked directly. I'm trying to help you avoid destroying your career over stress-induced paranoia, Tom replied without answering my question. Take the medical leave, get the help you need, and this whole situation can be resolved quietly without any permanent damage to your reputation. And if I refuse both options, Tom's expression hardened slightly, then you'll face the consequences of your choices. Construction sites can be dangerous places, especially for people who don't follow proper safety protocols. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, echoing Patricia's words from the day before. Tom was warning me that continued resistance could result in an accident similar to what might have happened to Mrs. Garrett. I need time to consider my options, I said, standing up from my chair. You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon, Tom stated firmly. After that, I'll be forced to take official action based on these inspection irregularities. I left Tom's office knowing that I had less than 6 hours to either accept defeat or find a way to expose the corruption network before they could frame me for crimes I hadn't committed or stage an accident that would silence me permanently. My phone rang as I walked to my car. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered, hoping it might be someone who could help with my deteriorating situation. Ms. Chen, this is Marcus Chen from Channel 7 News. I understand you might have information about construction corruption in our county. Could we meet to discuss what you've discovered? The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. How did you get my name and number? I've been investigating irregularities in building permits and inspection approvals for several months, Marcus explained. Your name came up in connection with Sterling Construction Group projects, and I'm hoping you might be able to provide some insight into patterns we've been documenting. What kind of patterns? Suspiciously fast permit approvals, inspection schedules that don't match normal procedures, and construction projects that seem to have political protection from normal oversight, Marcus listed. We're preparing a story about possible corruption in county government, but we need sources who can speak knowledgeably about building inspection procedures. I realize that Marcus might represent my only opportunity to expose the corruption network before Tom's afternoon deadline. If I could provide evidence to a news reporter who was already investigating similar issues, the story might break before Patricia and Derek could implement their plans to frame or eliminate me. Can you meet me at the downtown library in 1 hour? I asked. I have information that might be helpful for your investigation, but I need to make sure this meeting is completely confidential. Of course, Marcus agreed. I'll be in the reference section on the second floor. After ending the call, I sat in my car trying to decide whether contacting a news reporter was a smart strategy or a desperate mistake that would escalate the danger I was facing. But with Tom's deadline approaching and no other allies available, Marcus Chen might be my only hope for exposing the corruption network before it destroyed me. I also called Sarah Garrett to update her on my investigation and provide her with copies of the evidence I had gathered about Sterling Construction's fraudulent practices. If something happened to me, Sarah deserved to know that her grandmother's death was the result of criminal negligence, not an unavoidable accident. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully, I said when she answered. I've discovered evidence proving that your grandmother's balcony collapse was caused by construction fraud involving county officials and Sterling Construction Group. What kind of evidence? Recordings of construction officials admitting to using substandard materials and bribing county council members, plus financial records showing systematic corruption across multiple housing developments. Sarah was quiet for several moments before responding. Does this mean we can hold them accountable for Grandma's death? It means you have grounds for a wrongful death lawsuit and criminal charges, I confirmed. But the people involved in this corruption are dangerous, and they're planning to destroy the evidence and silence anyone who threatens to expose them. What can we do? I'm meeting with a news reporter in 1 hour to share everything I've discovered, I explained. If this story breaks on television tonight, it will be much harder for them to cover up the evidence or intimidate witnesses. Lydia, be careful, Sarah warned. If these people killed my grandmother to hide their crimes, they won't hesitate to hurt you too. Her concern was touching, but I had already passed the point where personal safety was my primary consideration. Too many innocent people had been harmed by this corruption network, and someone needed to take the risk necessary to expose their crimes and prevent future victims. The afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky as I drove toward my meeting with Marcus Chen, carrying evidence that could destroy multiple careers and send several people to prison, but also knowing that the next few hours might determine whether I survived long enough to see justice prevail over corruption. Marcus Chen was exactly where he had promised to be, sitting at a corner table in the library's reference section with a laptop computer and several manila folders spread around him. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with professional attire and an earnest expression that suggested he took his investigative journalism responsibilities seriously. "Ms. Chen," he said quietly as I approached his table, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I understand you have information about construction corruption that might relate to our ongoing investigation. Before I share anything with you," I said carefully, "I need to understand how you learned about my involvement and whether you have any connections to county government or Sterling Construction Group." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Smart question. I've been investigating irregularities in building permits for 6 months after receiving tips from multiple sources about rushed approvals and suspicious inspection schedules. Your name appeared in permit databases as the inspector of record for several questionable projects. Those inspection records are fraudulent," I stated firmly. "I never visited any Sterling construction sites until yesterday, when I discovered a systematic corruption network involving County Council member Patricia Whitman and her brother Tom Bradley, who supervises state inspectors." Marcus leaned forward with obvious interest. "You have evidence of this corruption." I explained everything I had discovered over the past 2 days. Derek's admission of using fraudulent materials, Patricia's bribery network, Tom's role in covering up violations, and the financial records Jake had provided showing systematic fraud across multiple counties. "Do you have recordings of these conversations?" Marcus asked. I played the audio files from my phone, watching Marcus's expression grow more serious as he heard Derek and Patricia discussing bribes and threats of violence. When I finished, Marcus was typing rapidly on his laptop, apparently preparing notes for a news story. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," Marcus said excitedly. "We have documentation of suspicious permit approvals and financial irregularities, but we've needed insider testimony to prove actual corruption. There's more." I continued explaining about Mrs. Garrett's death and the pattern of structural failures at Sterling Construction Properties. "I believe Eleanor Garrett was killed by construction defects that resulted from this corruption network." Marcus's expression grew grim as he realized the human cost of the corruption we were discussing. "How quickly do you think they'll move to silence you or destroy evidence?" "My supervisor gave me until 5 o'clock today to accept medical leave or face suspension on false corruption charges," I explained. "After that, they've made it clear that I might have an accident similar to what happened to Mrs. Garrett." Marcus checked his watch. "It's 3:30 now. We can have the story ready for the 6 o'clock news, if you're willing to go on camera with your allegations." The prospect of appearing on television was terrifying, but I realized it might be my only protection against Patricia and Derek's plans. Once my accusations were public, it would be much harder for them to harm me without obvious retaliation. "What about protecting other sources?" I asked. "Jake Morrison provided financial records, but he's also part of the corruption network. We can protect his identity while using the information he provided," Marcus assured me. "Whistleblower protection is a fundamental part of investigative journalism." I agreed to the television interview, and Marcus immediately called his news station to arrange for a camera crew to meet us at the Sterling construction site where my investigation had begun. The plan was to broadcast my allegations live during the evening news, while showing the actual construction violations I had discovered. At 4:45, Marcus and I arrived at the Riverside Luxury Apartments construction site with a Channel 7 news van and camera equipment. Derek Hamilton's truck was in the parking area, and I could see him talking on his phone near the construction trailers. "We're going live in 5 minutes," Marcus announced as the camera operator prepared his equipment. "Are you ready to make your allegations public?" My heart pounded as I realized there would be no turning back once this broadcast began. But thinking about Mrs. Garrett's death and the thousands of residents living in structurally compromised buildings gave me the courage to proceed. "Derek Hamilton," Marcus called out loudly as the cameras started rolling. "Could we get a comment about allegations of construction fraud and bribery involving Sterling Construction Group?" Derek emerged from his trailer looking angry and confused. When he saw me standing next to Marcus with a television camera pointed in our direction, his expression shifted to something approaching panic. "This is private property," Derek shouted. "You people need to leave immediately or I'm calling the police." "Actually, Mr. Hamilton," I said, looking directly into the camera, "I'm State Building Inspector Lydia Chen, and I'm here to officially condemn this construction project due to systematic safety violations." I pulled out my official identification and held it up for the camera. "Yesterday, I discovered that Sterling Construction Group has been using substandard materials and bribing county officials to approve dangerous construction work. This building represents an immediate threat to public safety." "You're trespassing," Derek yelled, but he made no move to approach us while the camera was recording. "The foundation of this building contains concrete that doesn't meet state specifications." I continued, pointing toward the visible structural problems. "County Council member Patricia Whitman has been receiving monthly bribes to ensure fraudulent inspection approvals, and her brother Tom Bradley has been covering up violations through the state inspection office." Marcus stepped forward with his microphone. "Ms. Chen has provided this news station with recordings and financial documents proving systematic corruption involving multiple county officials and construction projects across 4 counties. Derek's phone rang, and I could hear him explaining the situation to whoever was on the other end. Within minutes, 2 police cars arrived at the construction site, but instead of arresting us for trespassing, the officers seemed more interested in examining the structural violations I was pointing out. "Ma'am, are you really a state building inspector?" one of the officers asked. I showed him my credentials and explained the safety violations visible in the foundation work. This building should be condemned immediately to prevent potential structural failure that could injure or kill future residents. The officer examined the concrete work and nodded grimly. "This doesn't look right to me either. We're going to need to contact the county building department for an emergency inspection." "The county building department is part of the corruption network," I explained. "That's why I'm making these allegations public through the news media." As Marcus continued his live broadcast, additional vehicles began arriving at the construction site. I recognized Tom Bradley's car and assumed he was coming to implement whatever plan he and Patricia had developed to handle my allegations. But the next vehicle to arrive was an unmarked sedan with federal government license plates. 2 men in business suits approached our group and identified themselves as FBI agents investigating public corruption in county government. "Ms. Chen," one of the agents said, "we've been monitoring Patricia Whitman's financial activities for several months as part of a federal tax evasion investigation. Your allegations about construction corruption provide additional evidence we've been seeking." My heart soared as I realized that help had been available all along, but from sources I hadn't known existed. "You've been investigating Patricia Whitman. Federal tax evasion charges related to unreported income from unknown sources," the agent explained. "Your recordings and financial documents appear to explain where that unreported income was generated." Tom Bradley arrived just as the FBI agents were taking Derek into custody for questioning. When Tom saw the news cameras and federal agents, he immediately turned around and tried to leave. but additional FBI agents were waiting at the site entrance. Marcus continued his live broadcast as county and federal officials descended on the construction site. Within 2 hours, Patricia Whitman, Tom Bradley, Derek Hamilton, and 3 other county officials had been arrested on charges ranging from bribery and fraud to conspiracy and racketeering. The news story went viral on social media, with viewers sharing clips of Derek's panicked reaction to being confronted on live television. By the next morning, federal investigators had expanded their investigation to include Sterling construction projects in 6 counties, ultimately uncovering corruption networks that had affected dozens of residential developments. Sarah Garrett contacted me the following week to report that the FBI had opened a criminal investigation into her grandmother's death, with federal prosecutors examining whether the balcony collapse constituted negligent homicide resulting from construction fraud. The apartment complex management company immediately settled her family's lawsuit for an undisclosed amount rather than face trial with federal corruption charges pending against their business partners. Sterling Construction Group declared bankruptcy within a month as criminal investigations revealed the full scope of their fraudulent practices. The company's assets were liquidated to pay for structural repairs and resident relocations at properties that were deemed unsafe for continued occupancy. I received a commendation from the governor for exposing corruption that had endangered public safety, along with a promotion to head the newly created State Construction Fraud Investigation Division. My first official action was implementing mandatory unscheduled inspections at all major construction sites, with inspection teams that rotated between counties to prevent the development of corrupt relationships between inspectors and local officials. Jake Morrison cooperated with federal investigators and received immunity from prosecution in exchange for his testimony against Patricia Whitman and Derek Hamilton. He left the construction industry entirely and now works as a financial analyst for a nonprofit organization that advocates for affordable housing. The most satisfying outcome was the passage of Eleanor Garrett's law, which increased criminal penalties for construction fraud and established victim compensation funds for people harmed by deliberately substandard building practices. Sarah Garrett spoke at the bill signing ceremony, ensuring that her grandmother's death would help prevent similar tragedies in the future. The Riverside Luxury Apartments complex was demolished and rebuilt according to proper specifications, with federal oversight ensuring that all materials and construction methods met or exceeded safety standards. The new building includes a memorial garden dedicated to Eleanor Garrett and other victims of construction fraud. My relationship with Rachel grew stronger through the experience, as she helped me process the trauma of being threatened and nearly framed for crimes I hadn't committed. She often jokes that having a sister who exposes corruption networks makes family dinners more interesting, but she's also proud of the risks I took to protect public safety. I still conduct surprise inspections at construction sites throughout the state, but now I travel with a team of investigators and have direct access to federal resources when we discover evidence of systematic fraud. The work remains challenging and sometimes dangerous, but knowing that our oversight prevents tragedies like Mrs. Garrett's death makes every difficult day worthwhile. The experience taught me that corruption networks can seem impossibly powerful when you're facing them alone, but they collapse quickly when exposed to public scrutiny and federal investigation. Most importantly, I learned that ordinary people have the power to demand justice and protect their communities when they're willing to take the risks necessary to challenge those who abuse positions of trust. Sometimes I drive past the new Riverside Luxury Apartments and remember the fear I felt when Derek threatened me and Patricia ordered my elimination. But I also remember the satisfaction of seeing justice prevail over corruption, and the knowledge that future residents will live safely because someone was willing to stand up for what was right. Have you ever discovered corruption in your workplace or community? How do you think ordinary citizens can best protect themselves against fraud and abuse by people in positions of authority? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please like this video if you believe in holding powerful people accountable for their actions. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice and courage, and share this story with anyone who needs to know that one person really can make a difference in fighting corruption. Thank you for watching, and remember that your voice matters when it comes to protecting your community from those who would put profits before people's safety.